So my name is Jørgen Slund. I'm professor at the School of Chemical and Biomedical Engineering at NTU, and I'm director of this new center, which is the NTU Center for Food Technology, NAFTech we call it. So there we're doing research in relation to food technology, and more specifically, mostly our research is around the use of next generation DNA sequencing. We have a lot of problems related to microorganisms in food, but one of the biggest challenges at the moment is the continuous increase in antimicrobial resistance in microorganisms in food and also elsewhere. So this means that when you have a microorganism, bacterium, that is resistant to antimicrobials, basically you cannot treat that microorganism. So that becomes a very, very major problem. At the moment, it's estimated that 700,000 people every year in the world die from antimicrobial resistant bacteria. It's estimated that by 2050, that number will be 10 million. So 10 million people die every year from antimicrobial resistant microorganisms. That's more than die from cancer. So it's really, really significant. And that development, if we want to do something about that, there are lots of different policy options to do, but the basis for doing something has to be surveillance data, scientific data about the size of the problem, and also data that we can use to monitor whether we are actually succeeding in what we want to do. All these data should be based on next generation sequencing, sequenced DNA. And we should share that across borders and all over the world. And that would be the way to try to avoid going from 700,000 to 10 million within the next 30 years. Because that is the best estimation that we have at the moment, that this is a dramatic disaster just waiting to happen. So in microbiology in general, now we of course work mainly with microbiology in food, but in general in microbiology we've been using the same method to identify microorganisms, bacteria, for the last 140 years. They were invented by Pasteur and Koch in 1872, 76, something like that. Now we have the first real change in our capacity to understand microorganisms because we can use DNA sequencing. So it's not only a change, it's basically a revolution in relation to what you can do to identify and compare microorganisms, and also to understand how they work in food and how they make people sick. It's a challenge and an opportunity, because it's a challenge because we believe that if we create a global machine or a global repository of all the DNA sequences of all microorganisms in the world, we will be able to help each other in major ways in relation to food safety and how we can make food safer and how we can avoid foodborne outbreaks. But if parts of the world are not participating in this, it will be a challenge, and there is a risk that parts of the world, especially poorer parts of the world, but at the moment it also looks like Southeast Asia, could actually be excluded from this development. We see that it already is moving in the US, it already is moving in the EU. There's no real movement in Asia. So this would mean that we would create these major opportunities in the rich countries in the West, but we would not have them in our region. And that would mean a number of different things, and among them it would mean that it might be that in the future the countries of the West will actually exclude some of the foods that are produced in this region because we cannot ensure the same level of safety that they can, because they are using this new technology. So it's a challenge if you don't participate in this development. It's an opportunity if you do participate in the development. And my problem now is that I don't see any direction in ASEAN or in the region, in the larger region, to actually participate in this major development, and it is major. So in relation to this area, obviously since there are already developments in other parts of the world, this part of the world needs to get involved in that. And we know that in Singapore we have very strong capacity in the universities, NUS and NTU, in relation to the use of next generation DNA sequencing. So we know that we have a research basis here and very strong universities, very highly ranked internationally. So we know that we can do all these things. We know that we can create, we can look into the DNA of the microorganisms, we can do the sequencing, we can analyze it. But we need the governments of the countries in our region to actually accept that this is a major challenge and to then accept that we need to participate in this so that it becomes an opportunity for us also, because we have a lot that we could give to the international society in relation to that, but we're not really there at the moment.
I'm Tasneem Siddiqui. I'm from Bangladesh. I teach political science in the University of Dhaka. A few of us, teachers in the university and students, we developed this refugee and migratory movements research unit within the university, where we work on, among other things, on non-traditional security, particularly in the context of migration. Like, if you think Bangladesh was seen as a bottomless basket in 1971 when it got liberated. So it, from a least developed country, it has transformed into a middle income country, and that has been done through the hard work of people. And then climate change, you can see, is challenging all the hard-earned developmental outcomes of Bangladesh. So this is what I see as a disaster or as a disruption. So incremental changes, small things, that is not what we are facing through climate change. So the difference is, it is huge, and its implication is not within Bangladesh, it is in the bordering countries all over the world. So therefore, disruption and change is completely two different things. In the context of Bangladesh, also all over, climate change, migration is seen as a problem, as a challenge, as a threat, that hundreds and thousands will move from Bangladesh to all the surrounding countries or even to United States of America. So therefore, this is a challenge, and if this challenge can be resolved by, if you think, sustainable development goal, and where no one will leave behind, so these group of people who will be evicted from their homestead, land and livelihood, if they can be made, their economic situation is better off than when they got displaced. If that can be ensured through right kind of policy and action, that I call resilience. Yes, definitely. It's a huge challenge. Bangladesh alone cannot handle this challenge. But within Bangladesh, there are a lot of things needs to be done. Think of transforming migration into, from a threat to a development tool will require certain policy changes within Bangladesh. Bangladesh looks at migration as a threat. So what we are saying, that people are displaced, you need to have a right kind of policy on internally displaced population, and when you have prevention, then management during displacement, and then once they are displaced, if they can be sent back to their area of origin when places are normal, those things, relocation, resettlement, integration in local community, all these things are planned, and then from there, if a few who are settled in those areas can also take part in international short-term contract migration as well as internal livelihood migration to urban areas, that will resolve the problem and resilience can be developed. Remittances sent by these migrants in local areas, we have studied, increases income of these families than before. So I do see a probability of doing things, but for that you require international partnership, resource allocation, global fund should be allocated in training people so that livelihood option, at the same time local level adaptation options can be used by people. See, when you look at Bangladesh, so far most of the interventions in climate change adaptation are infrastructural. Therefore, all the scientific things like polder, bridge, dam, all these things have been made in Bangladesh through use of technology. Many of them supported people to stay put in those areas where earlier flood and other things would wash away their life. But at the same time, many of these technologies have been side effects, and those side effects actually made certain areas unlivable. Production doesn't take place there, waterlogging takes place, many types of health problems. These are all related with infrastructure not in a planned manner. So therefore technology can be good, technology can be bad. In many cases, in the previous technological interventions, some of them are not that good. Technology has to be used, but technology has to be people friendly, and then technology has to be, the local knowledge has to be incorporated with the technology. There are thousands of years people are making cross dam, this and that to protect themselves, no? But those knowledge has to be coordinated with the development effort, and the engineers and others, the way they use technology, they must have local knowledge and social science knowledge. Then technology will definitely bring in good results.
I'm K.S. Balakrishnan from University of Malaya. I've been a policy analyst, security, foreign policy, whatever happens to Malaysia, the region. So I've been working on this like 20 to 30 years, from student to researcher to policy advisor to as a lecturer as well. So, and I see this area is always vibrant. There's a lot of things happening. If you want to relate to disruption, obviously there are another dimension to look at, particularly when everything is interrelated and can be also shifting in a massive way to bring about a kind of a different response. And there's always an expectation of disruptions in society too sometimes, because there's frustration about certain system or certain way of doing. Mm-hmm. So this disruption can be not so very close to the word of revolution, but it has got slightly closer meaning to that, because it can break down structures and change systems and society. If you look at the armed forces, they have to now go digitalized in many ways. If you look at the police, they have to go more digitalized. So many enforcement agencies, whether it's custom, police, immigration, and all that, have to go digitalized. So this brings, the effort to hasten work fast, make the work fast and efficient. But at the same time, the loopholes, because these are security dimensions, there are a lot of loopholes, weaknesses in which anybody can break into anything nowadays in cyber realm. So similarly, when you look at economic transformation, government into massive economic transformation, but these transformations may not bring good results for society. A particular segment of society who is not adapt, and some society, they can be learned, but there is no opportunity because technology closes the gap, closes the opportunity, because robotic, many other computer-based solutions for jobs are becoming more efficient, and therefore human resources are lesser needed, So if you look at the same with crime, various type of crime, different type of commercial crime, different kind of challenges, effects, and there's no guarantee for a solution that is 100%, So that is the sad part of the security dimension, the ICT dimension, this entire realm I'm looking at, it is very scary to see that the vulnerability is equally high. The case, for example, where I'm focusing a little bit more on, let's say, ICT revolution, internet, AI, alternative intelligence and all that, which means basically we're talking about a world of ICT revolution, So this has crept into every sectors of society. In Malaysia, the economy, politics, security, socio-cultural dimension, every dimension is affected. I believe this is the case for the region of ASEAN too, So we are all into this shift moved by technology, as well as the kind of changes that I expected forward in moving forward, So there's a lot of things happening. There are positive dimension to it because there's demand is higher, the expectation is higher, the younger generation is really adaptive. So the positive gain is big. At the same time, the negative problems are also on the increase, which means not everything is rosy. There's a lot of window of vulnerability, in which people who are not having good intent can take advantage and create problems, create chaos. So this disruption is healthy on one side, but the danger and the risk is also growing in another side. So it's not like a parallel growth of both positive, which brings big economic benefit, but also the negative, which bring the problem much bigger as well, So this is quite interesting. Yeah, resilient is a good word, its ability to cope, manage, do better, overcome, and be more stronger, against all these odds, against all these disruptions, against the, have the wherewithal, to really withstand and guide the entire process into a much advantageous position. Yeah, but this resilience are important, and to what extent are we resilient? Countries resilient, region resilient, individual resilient is quite challenging. It's quite questionable, So that's the state we are now in. Let's say we are less resilient because while the positive gain is big, the losses are also big. Because, for example, if you say technology is going to bring about big growth to the economy, to the country, opportunity, yes, the figure shows good, big, but at the same time, if you look at that dimension of the economy, let's say in terms of losses of jobs, loss of opportunity for many businesses, smaller businesses and all that, that figures too are quite interestingly big and growing. So in which case, to be very confident to say we are resilient, it's quite a difficult thing. Yeah, this is a challenging task ahead. While, for example, if I look at ICT security, national security, regional security, crime and all kind of things, of course, they are also in the increase while we have completely moved into this internet and ICT information age lifestyle, But what I'm saying is that we can strengthen laws, we can strengthen enforcement, we can have active contribution from all sectors, not just police, military and enforcement part, but society, civil society, private sector, public on the whole to strengthen resilience, But having said that, there are always smaller groups, criminal groups, groups that want to manipulate, groups that want to defeat, groups that see one another as rival, So this is part of human psyche, So that always constantly challenge the ability to strengthen this enforcement, the legal dimension, trying to close this gap of loopholes and all that. It's interesting, good question, because the next stage is quite funny because the speed is higher. It's like one side of the disruption is slow motion at a time of like 10-year period. Now the disruption can be much faster because the speed of technology is much faster, and it brings advantage to those who have that power, that ability to adapt, invent, innovate, and change. But there are more than half of society are not catching up, and there may be a quarter of not be in line with this and not happy with the changes. So these present enormous challenges, and our ability to enhance resilience using technology too, while it appears good, but it's all no guarantee. There's no comprehensive solution to this. This is what I've discovered after researching on all these things. So we can mitigate, we can manage, we cannot eliminate. So that is a state in which we look at the whole thing.
This is Lina Rekilatamang. I work as Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific Program at International IDEA, based in Canberra in Australia. International IDEA, Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, is an intergovernmental organization with 30 member states from all around the world. Our mandate is to support democracy worldwide, and we do that by producing a lot of knowledge resources, but also by supporting country reforms. So in brief, we are both a think tank and a do tank. And at the end of the last year, International IDEA published a report on global state of democracy, exploring democracy's resilience, providing analysis of global and regional trends of democracy since 1975 until 2015. In the context of democracy support, there is currently a lot of debate about the global state of democracy. Some observers hold that we are witnessing a significant decline in the global level, and they see clear signs of reverse wave of democratization. And others hold that these warnings are somewhat exaggerated and that we merely witnessed a slowdown or global standstill of democratic progress. Our analysis at IDEA puts us somewhere in between this debate. We think that the current state of democracy is characterized by what we call trendless fluctuation, which meaning that when you take a closer look, data gives us a picture of developments which moves us backward and forward, nuancing the discussion on full-scale recession. It is possible that good developments, bad developments, take place at the same time in the same country. Hence, disruption to democratization can take many forms, but what we have been interested in our latest research is something we call modern democratic backsliding, referring to developments taking society backwards in the process of democratization. We define modern democratic backsliding as phenomena where elected executives gradually weaken some of the constraints to their political power or increase obstacles to political opposition, restricting freedoms of civil society, media freedoms, and so on. Traditional democratic backsliding may refer to military coups or electoral frauds, whereas in modern democratic backsliding, leaders increase their power by manipulating the very instruments of democracy, such as changes in electoral norms, restricting freedom of speech, sometimes even changing constitution, for example, doing away the tenure limits. And these disruptions have ripple effect on functioning of the institutions beyond those that are directly targeted, and so affect people's livelihoods and safety and overall well-being. Overall, we can say that traditional backsliding is, globally speaking, decreasing, whereas this modern backsliding, democratic backsliding, is very much on the rise. Examples of such backsliding include developments in Venezuela, in Turkey, and also recently in Cambodia. We define resilience as the property of a social systems to survive, cope, and recover from societal crises and challenges. So what can be those resilient responses? Number one, citizen engagement and resistance to backsliding, and having a strong civil society and independent media are critical. And another one is the greater institutional resilience, meaning the prevalence of multiple checks and balances so that it decreases the likelihood of one particular branch, most often the executive, to take all the democratic space. So that there is space for parliaments, the judiciary, prosecutors to operate. And oftentimes, the courts are proven to be the last resort of addressing some of the authoritarian tendencies. Role of regional organizations can be of importance in providing resilient responses, but also in strengthening democratic culture. Regional organizations can come up with formal mechanisms for monitoring, for constitutional governance. They can also foster intra-regional dialogue on constitutional democracy. Some organizations, for example, EU, ECOWAS, and African Union, have developed these mechanisms quite far, also including sanction systems. IT or technology is a double-edged sword. Technology can have lots of positive implications, connecting citizens with each other, also increasing transparency and communication between citizens and state institutions, also by revealing wrongdoings by the state. Technology can advance mechanisms for direct democracy as well. Use of technology can reduce costs, allow access to services. So it can serve as a great equalizer between citizens in society. But at the same time, we must remember that not all Asia is connected. Not everyone has a smartphone today. And those platforms can be used for bad or negative purposes as well, spreading hate speech or disinformation or mobilizing against a group of people or against individuals. But I do believe this is a new phenomena for the developed and developing world alike, and it's challenging our thinking, our collective thinking in unprecedented ways. And all of us studying political systems try to better understand this impact of new technology to our societies and to our political systems.
I'm Devi Fortuna Anwar. I'm a political scientist. My focus is more on international relations, Indonesia's foreign policy, on ASEAN, but I've also been looking at the democratization in Indonesia. I've also worked in government. In fact, for between 2010 and 2017, I was Deputy Secretary to the Vice President of the Republic of Indonesia for political affairs and then for government policy support. My permanent affiliation is with the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, where I'm a research professor at the Center for Political Studies. I'm also involved with a think tank, the Habibie Center, where I'm chair for the Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. And from the 1st of August 2017 until the end of July 2018, I'm a distinguished visiting professor at RSIS, where I'm teaching a course on Indonesia's foreign policy. In my work, I said, I've been in and out of academic and government, and my own experience is that I was in academia fully during the still authoritarian regime of President Suharto, and trying to promote democracy as an academic activist also. It was not an easy way to do in Indonesia, given the power of the state. But here the disruption of globalization came to our existence, because particularly the globalization in the financial sector, how the whole economies were linked to each other. If you remember, the 1997 Asian financial crisis started in Thailand, and then very quickly it spread to the rest of Asia, to Korea, and then to Indonesia. At the beginning, we did not think that the financial crisis would really affect Indonesia that much, because the World Bank and other economists, observers of Indonesia, argued that the fundamentals of Indonesian economics were quite well, developed. But as we know, the Indonesian New Order government under President Suharto, its legitimacy was based very much on one area, namely economic development. While it controlled the political space, it controlled social activities, it really restricted freedom of speech. But this grand swell of global force was not, could not be contained, and within a very short while, it led to the collapse of the whole New Order government. And I was involved very early on. When President Suharto fell from power, his Vice President Habibie had already invited me to help him in his government as one of his assistants at the Vice President's office. And then I became very involved immediately, in the early period of Indonesian democratic transition. So that was a total disruption of Indonesian social political lives that was in fact initially driven by global forces, and one of the key areas that we were all interlinked in our financial system, in our economic system. So that, as I, so in my work, I became part of the inner circle that was very active in Indonesia's democratic transition from the very beginning. So that's also my work, and it made me very aware that Indonesia cannot afford to insulate itself from what is happening in the region, from what is happening in the global arena. The tendency to be much more inward-looking, to be navel-gazing, and to ignore the forces that are current in the global and regional arena would be very, very detrimental to our own national survival. So there are so many disruptors, economic globalizations, the spread of ideas like democracies and human rights and freedom, the energy that swept the world, the wave of democratization after the end of the Cold War. No countries could afford to close itself, to that forces. So I was very much in the vortex of that massive disruption. a challenge and an opportunity. It became an opportunity because then the attempts of pro-democracy activists, of human rights activists in the past to open up the political space in Indonesia always faced this major block that why challenge a new order government that was economically very successful, that was successful in elevating Indonesia from one of the less developing countries into one of the 10 economic miracles. But after the financial crisis and the collapse of the various institutions that led in fact to communal conflicts, to riots, to a situation of chaos in Indonesia and regional rebellions also, we were able to say that unless we develop a more holistic system where we pay equal attention to political development, not just to economic development, but we need also to develop the leg of political institution and ensuring political participation, that unless people have a stake, a sense of ownership to the political system, then any system that you have in the long run will not be sustainable, because it will not have resilience. Because if you only base your legitimacy on economic development and economic growth, what happens when there is a recession? You lose that legitimacy. You'll have political demonstrations, and if your political institutions do not give space to protest, to demands for change, it will always end up painfully. Leaders will be pushed from power against their will. There will be massive social unrest, and then you have to start anew again. While if we have a more open political system, you can have political demonstrations, you can have change of government, but it will just be another day, you have elections, and then you can have a new leader. While in a non-democratic system, a change of government is always very, very traumatic and quite often lead to conflicts, violence. It is in fact very, very important, because in the modern age, no matter how powerful the state, it is no longer able to control everything. Yeah, it cannot control the economy entirely. Even China is integrated into the global economy, and the financial system is out there. It is not something that the state can fully control. The communication, no matter how authoritarian the state, with the new technology, it is no longer simply in the power of the state to shut off everything anymore. Because if you shut it off, you also damages your own economic development, your own social development. So I think that at the regional and global level, we really need to learn together, to educate ourselves about the different changes which the various global trends are bringing on us, including, among others, technology is not the one and only thing, but this integration forces, which is not necessarily always government driven, it's business driven, it's technology driven, it's societies driven, the mass tourism, the mass travel of people across the world, including forced migration. These are all major trends which we need to pay attention to, because they all affect our lives. So yes, there needs to be a partnership between different sectors. With the current existence, of ICT, which we should optimize, to facilitate communication, networking, exchange of ideas, then we can actually accelerate, the process of mutual learning. In my own personal work, for example, and I'm sure that all of those who have lived before the internet era, I used to spend a fortune paying DHL every time I needed to send an article or a chapter, or even when I was writing my thesis. When I was in the field, I had to spend a fortune paying DHL to get a chapter to my supervisors or to get publications, and then I have to wait months before comments, and then rewriting it and then send it by DHL again, which is very inefficient. Now you can do it within one day. You can go back and forth and get all these ideas across. So the potential is really great, for mutual learning and developing various areas of collaboration. At the same time, it's not just the good guys who are using this technology, so we have to be fully alert also at the possible dark side of the ICT. The present generation is taking technology for granted. For young people, they cannot imagine an era where they do not have touchscreen. Using pen and paper for my generation is probably for my grandchildren's generation will be, working with computers and so on. So they will have to learn also how to make use of it. In my day, we had to find ways to distract ourselves. While we're studying, if you're reading your textbook, you do not really necessarily have novels and comics with you at the same times. But now you'll find that while you're working on your school project, school assignment, you browse and then you end up reading so many other things which some are useful, but most are probably not useful. So management of time and be more aware, of what you're reading and whether it is for your advancement or not becomes an issue. And here, in the old days, parents always know better than the children. In this case now, parents are behind, they are not really up to speed with various technological development, and usually you have to learn from your children. So this is a reverse parental role also. Children also need to educate their parents about the use of this technology. So in a way, it is more egalitarian, less hierarchical, and therefore it's very exciting. But also the challenge is here that, where do you set the boundaries?